This week's episode of the podcast is brought to you by ArtTactic.com, where you can now download our latest report on the Chinese art market. The Hong Kong and mainland China modern and contemporary art market is experiencing a transformative phase, establishing itself as a prominent global art center. And our guest in this week's episode, Robert Sleigh, is actually a contributor who helped with this report. And don't forget to use the promo code podcast15 to save 15% off this report and all reports on arttactic.com. Thanks for listening to the Art Tactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. There's been a flurry of activity in the Chinese art market over the last few weeks, first with Art Basel Hong Kong, followed closely by the major post-war and contemporary auctions. With continued uncertainty surrounding the state of the global art market, each key event offers valuable insights into where things stand. In this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Robert Sleigh, founder of Robert Sleigh Consulting, where he offers business-to-business consulting on navigating the global auction landscape. Based in Hong Kong since 2010, Robert shares his perspective on how both the fair and auctions performed this year and what it all suggests about the current state of the market in China. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Robert. We appreciate it. So I'm excited to have you on to chat about a variety of aspects of the Chinese art market. I think a great place to start is Art Basel Hong Kong, which just recently concluded. I know many of our listeners probably didn't attend, but we're following it closely in terms of the coverage and talking to people who were there to try to get a feel for what the fair was like. You were there in Hong Kong. Tell us, how was the atmosphere? What was it like on the ground? How did it compare to previous years in terms of attendance, sales, and really what was the general mood of the market?
Yes, I think the overriding narrative, looking back on this edition of Art Basel Hong Kong, was that it was definitely the most successful since 2019 and on multiple levels. I think that the general feeling was that Hong Kong has a little bit swagger back, with multiple concurrent events during the week, which is really now known as Hong Kong Art Week, including comprehensive, citywide exhibition programs, as well as some big name luxury events, Wealth Conference, and the famous Hong Kong Rugby Sevens, which is an iconic cultural event here. Coming up this week, Coldplay are playing multiple nights this week in Hong Kong at the newly opened Kai Tak Stadium, which was built on the site of the old airport. So it really feels like Hong Kong has regained a little bit of its confidence after really a few tough years, which are put behind us after obviously the extraordinary response to the COVID pandemic with the lockdown that really isolated us completely from the world for a long period of time. And then that was obviously preceded by the social unrest as well, which obviously had a negative effect. So I think looking at Art Basel Hong Kong 2025, looking at the numbers, there were definitely more visitors from Europe, USA, South Asia, as well as mainland China than in recent years. There were 240 galleries from 42 countries, 91,000 visitors over the exhibition, including lots of important museums and foundations. There were reports of sales for works between 50 and 100,000 was very strong. And then reportedly around 20 works or so over the $1 million mark, mainly to collectors from Greater China. Certainly a significant improvement on recent years, but maybe lacking the big headline sales, whereas you had good volumes for finding buyers at the lower end, and the big Western galleries reportedly making some strong sales. Western art still a huge draw, but also much more Asian art on offer, I think, this year. And that seemed to be something that a lot of people commented on, as well as from Western galleries. And maybe that's a move in style to a more defined Asian character to the fair, as demand for Asian art appears to be returning.
Yeah, and auctions were, of course, also a big part of the week with major sales at Christie's and Sotheby's. What was the takeaway from the performances of those sales?
So Christie's and Sotheby's having for years wanting to coincide with Art Basel, but never being able to because their scheduling was governed by the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre, which is government controlled with a packed schedule. And now, obviously, the auction houses had their much publicized real estate investments in Hong Kong with Christie's at the Henderson building, and then Sotheby's at the taking a different tack in Chater House in the old Giorgio Armani retail space. So now they have their own spaces. They did both go for coinciding with the Art Basel week to try and leverage the amount of visitors coming into Hong Kong. The numbers, unfortunately, on these auctions, on the evening sales, didn't really deliver this time a combined total of 89.2 million, which is the lowest since 2018. I think there are some elements there which are positive. Sotheby's sold 40 out of 42 lots, so that's 95%. 30 million hammer with a 1930 Chagall at 4.4 million was the top lot. 3 out of 5 lots went to mainland buyers, I think, and 33% of lots sold above the mid estimate. Christie's also with 95% sold rate of their 41 lots, with a total of 59 million hammer. This is US dollars. There was a 1984 Basquiat at 12 million that was to an Asian collector, was their top lot, with 26 lots sold above the high estimate. What was noted widely was the strong interest in Thai and Vietnamese artists, which also aligned with a lot of strength in bidding from Southeast Asian clients. And I did actually hear some talk of Bangkok potentially being a future site for an art fair as well. So that might be something to look out for the future. Philips chose not to fight for the wallet share during this week, during Hong Kong Art Week. They had their lower value mid-season sale during the week and their evening sale on May 26th.
I also wanted to ask you some broader questions about collecting in China. One is the fact that there's been a narrative that's been developing in the art world over the last few years regarding an increased short-term speculative type of collecting going on in China. I'm curious, to what degree do you think that's actually the case, and how do you transition more collectors to approach collecting from a long-term perspective?
Yeah, I think, the climate right now is really not suitable for that sort of speculative deal. And we're not really seeing very much of it. I think there's some nervousness, and you've got higher interest rates, which keep speculators on the sidelines. This is Asia, and investment is never very far away from the conversation. But much of the narrative during Art Week was based around buying works for the long term. Market is still young versus Europe and US, although it's evolved incredibly quickly over the last, 15 years, as an asset class to store wealth, which has been used by the community. I think it probably is going to move to more of a legacy based collecting pattern, and I think lots of what was been discussed during the Hong Kong Art Week was a return to buying Asian art. And there's a lot of advisors, I think, counseling people to buy for the long term, to buy what they love, and less about short term speculation. So for the moment, at least, I think the market is evolving into a more mature state, and also the financial conditions currently don't favor short term speculation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And another trend that I find fascinating is the growing influence of millennials and Gen Z collectors, basically younger collectors in the art scene there in China. How much influence do they actually have, and how are their preferences and behaviors reshaping the market there?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting areas of the market, and the people I speak to who deal with these group of collectors directly are mostly very positive about it. I think their overriding commentary is that younger collectors have a really diverse taste, and they're happy to go across category. Then they mentioned an interest in female artists, surrealism, LGBTQ plus, as well as ultra contemporary and impressionist works. Some of the Vietnam big names such as Vu Co Dam and Le Faux also sought out by young collectors. So there really are no rules here, but there is a lot of interest and there is a lot of demand. I think there's a lot of optimism around this group in Asia, as also there's anticipated they're going to be boosted by a big wealth transfer from boomers and Gen X's to millennials and Gen Z before the middle of the century. So I think there is a lot of anticipation around there. I think the comments also is they see the auction houses see a lot of new young bidders at every auction, but maybe they also can lack a little strategy there, and sometimes they don't always come back for the next auction as well. But I'm sure as the market matures and their collecting strategy matures, then that will also come together as well.
Having been based in Hong Kong for several years, I'm also really interested in hearing your perspective on how you think the rise of other Asian art hubs like Seoul and Singapore might be influencing the future of the art market in Hong Kong and mainland China.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Adam. There's been a lot of talk about other places in Hong Kong. And as I mentioned earlier, I think I did hear Bangkok mentioned several times during the week as the site for another potential art fair, which well remains to be seen on that. But I think this conversation really came to a peak during the COVID pandemic, during the lockdown for Hong Kong, where Hong Kong was really off limits for any sort of transactions at all. And that's where there was a lot of focus on Singapore, which a lot of companies put one foot in Singapore during that period as some sort of insurance policy. And then Seoul, obviously, with the Freeze Fair, got a lot of press as well during that period. But I think what we've seen this week, or during the Hong Kong Art Week, is that Hong Kong is firmly back as the premier destination for as the art hub in Asia. Financially and logistically, it's a low friction hub with a very beneficial tax regime that currently really no other Asian location can compete with. I mean, contemporary art transactions require speed and efficiency, and Hong Kong can deliver that. The proximity to the mainland now, you have high-speed trains which go straight over the border. It really is supremely easy now with also relaxed visa rules to allow free passage of people between mainland China and Hong Kong. So I think, during the social unrest and the lockdown, obviously a lot of other places got some focus, but I think Hong Kong is back at the front of the line now as far as the art hub for Asia.
And so now, as we look forward, what do you predict will be some of the most critical factors that ultimately influence the growth or contraction of the Chinese art market over the next several years?
Right, yeah. The question everyone wants to know, I guess. I mean, I think a lot of the factors affecting Hong Kong and mainland China as an art hub are a lot of the factors that face the rest of the world. But I think really the biggest one has to be the mainland Chinese economy, which is obviously in a period where it is quieter due to the housing crisis the property crisis that is there. And the government has made it clear they're not looking for a quick fix. They're looking for a sustainable exit out of that, which is not going to cause a boom bust. And they're playing a long-term strategy on that. So I think the market will depend on how China recovers and what happens with that. I think the government's avoiding this stimulus that is going to cause short-term a short-term boom and is happy to play the long game on this. Capital controls are also a factor, so the ability for mainland Chinese nationals to get money out of China, and that is controlled as well. But there are also exciting opportunities like the development of the Greater Bay Area, which is where Hong Kong meets China, and obviously within that you have Shenzhen as the tech and culture hub, which is the most buoyant part of southern China, and that's something which will continue to develop and create opportunities for everyone.
Robert, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and helping us recap this year's edition of Art Basel Hong Kong, as well as the major Hong Kong auctions. We really appreciate your valuable perspective on everything happening in the Chinese art market.
Thanks for having me, Adam.